Now, getting into our first segment of the day, which is Justin Fields being traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Really interesting how this all played out, because the Steelers were a team that Justin Fields was linked to at the beginning of the offseason, but there were many reports that came out about how the Steelers weren't looking for any veteran guys. They weren't necessarily interested in Justin Fields. And here they are with a totally new quarterback room in Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. So this trade took place on Saturday, did come right off of the heels of them trading their starter from last season, Kenny Pickett, to the Eagles, which took place late on Friday. Pickett reportedly did not handle the Russell Wilson signing well and was sent packing from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia. The Steelers acquired a 4th-round pick for Kenny Pickett and then moved a conditional 6th-rounder for Justin Fields. It could pan out to be a 4th-round pick depending on how much playing time Justin Fields gets in Pittsburgh, but very interesting to see how that all played out. But on the note of playing time, that is the big debate that is going on in Pittsburgh now with these two quarterbacks in the room. Again, neither of them were in Pittsburgh last year too, so it's not like there's any sort of a real established dynamic ahead of time. Now, it has been reported that Russell Wilson will be the week 1 starter. Supposedly, Justin Fields was told immediately that he was going to be the Steelers' backup for the upcoming season. Now, we will see how long that lasts. It's interesting because Russell Wilson, who the Steelers signed to just a $1.2 million deals a couple weeks ago, it's not like they are wrapped up financially in him, so it could be very easy for them to move on from him if they wanted to go with Fields. But it's also interesting to see how they play this season, because of the fact that you look at the Steelers organization and you have to sort of wonder what their number one priority it is. I would say it is trying to win games, win playoff games, which some of you may be like, no duh, but there is something to when you bring in a young quarterback for the first time. It's about developing him. For the Panthers this year, their priority is not to necessarily win games. It's making sure that they didn't make a mistake in taking Bryce Young and trying to set him up for the future. The Steelers here have been in the realm of, I wouldn't say contention necessarily, but they've been, it's almost more like mediocrity, where, of course, Mike Tomlin's streak as the head coach of the Steelers of never having a losing season continued on this past year. We're now looking at 2 decades of this, and yet, even with the non-losing records the past handful of years, they still haven't won a playoff game since 2016. And since then, again, it's been some fine football, but overall it's been very mediocre, where they've had winning seasons in the past 3 years with 2 playoff appearances, and yet they've had a negative point differential on the season in all 3 of those years. They were 0-2 in the playoffs during that stretch, and Tomlin has helped this Steelers team overachieve because he's a good coach, but they've been missing the elite quarterback play. Of course, Ben Roethlisberger was getting older. He ends up retiring in 2021, I believe it was, but even by the end of that run for Roethlisberger, it was pretty hard to watch. A legend of the game, of course, but his best years were very clearly behind him, and he was really a shell of himself at that time. They've ranked 23rd or lower in offensive yards each of the past 5 seasons, 21st or lower in points scored in 4 of the past 5. And because of this, they felt the need to shake things up headed into next season. And now both of these options in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields can be solid, but they do come with some concerns, which is why, of course, they were both available. I do think that it's sort of being generalized that they were both available, which means they were both not good enough in their previous destinations. Now, while to some degree that's true, I also don't think that that's fully fair, because Justin Fields, I've never been a huge fan of. I think the inconsistencies in the passing game are a real concern. The fumbling has been a little ridiculous, especially some of the late game moments with him. But I thought that he showed some promise last year, to the point where if the Bears didn't have the number 1 overall pick, especially in a second straight year, they wouldn't be moving on from him, where there is still a level of unknown of whether or not Fields can be a true franchise quarterback. But Caleb Williams is coming into this draft, to some being named one of the best quarterback prospects we've seen entering the draft of all time. Now, that seems a little bit extreme, but at the same time, the Bears last year had the number 1 overall pick. They passed on using it to get another year. They acquired DJ Moore. It was a great deal for them. That also got them the number 1 overall pick this season. But you see, Bryce Young might not have had the best rookie season, but CJ Stroud really popped. Anthony Richardson dealt with injuries, but he seems like he could be a franchise quarterback as well. And for GM Ryan Poles, his job is really on the line with this decision. And specifically, if he were to not take a quarterback in this draft and Fields doesn't work out, his job is on the line, and he knows that. This helps him to sort of prolong his career as the Bears general manager, and there's a handful of moves that he's made that people have been a big fan of. I think that he's been very hit or miss at times, so I don't want to give him all the credit in the world, but he has helped to build up, at least we saw from the trade deadline on last year when they added Montez Sweat, they have been a team trending in the right direction. But again, that quarterback position is still a little bit of a question mark, and now they are moving on from Fields and ideally moving forward with Caleb Williams. At least that is what it seems like. Now, if you look at Russell Wilson and how he plays into all of this with the Steelers, there was a case where it was more so the Broncos just massively overpaying to bring him in a trade a couple years ago in terms of money and draft compensation. This is one where the Broncos are paying him $40 million to be somewhere else. So I don't think that those circumstances automatically make Justin Fields better, but I do think that there is a real discrepancy in between why Russell Wilson was available and why Justin Fields was available. Now, on that note, as much as I'm not really a believer in Russell Wilson, I've been pretty vocal about that on the show the past few weeks. I do understand why they would lean to him being the starting quarterback entering the season, where, of course, veteran quarterback, you're trying to win playoff games. There's not really, again, I don't think that their priority is going to be anywhere near making sure Justin Fields is in the best possible situation to succeed. I believe it's more about they know that they need to actually start winning some of these playoff games. Mike Tomlin is headed into the last season of his contract. They want to win some playoff games, and Russell Wilson, in theory, based off of the veteran guy, has been to multiple Super Bowls, can be the one to sort of take the Steelers over the hump. I still don't see Super Bowl contention necessarily with either of these guys, but there is a possibility that they could really level up from an offense that has been very stagnant over the past handful of years. And ideally for the Steelers, their day one starter is good enough to lead them to the place where they need to be. But also, I think when it comes to this veteran leadership and along those lines, it's probably easier for them to bench an older veteran quarterback for a younger guy. And if they, for any reason, had to make another switch, Wilson would probably be more prepared as opposed to Justin Fields. We just saw last year where Kenny Pickett got injured. It was Mason Rudolph coming in, and once the team started winning games, they stuck it out with him, and Pickett was really, I don't know, it's hard to say dramatic about the situation, but reports came out that he refused to be the emergency quarterback should they need him. There's just almost this psychological factor that comes in with the youth versus the experience. And even if Russell Wilson were to, and again, the Steelers aren't planning for this, but if Wilson were to get benched early in the year, he can still be a viable fallback option late in the year if Justin Fields either isn't playing well or gets injured. And again, not trying to make multiple changes in that quarterback position, but something worth noting in my opinion. I do think that essentially saying there's no competition entering week one all the way in March is a little bit interesting, where you could at least start to build up, obviously not quarterback controversy, but a competition, a healthy competition, I do think is beneficial to everyone involved in those instances. And that's essentially not the case now. They're saying it's going to be Wilson, and ultimately we won't really have answers as to who is the best option for them, who gives them the best chance to win until training camp comes around a few months in the future. Like I sort of alluded to, it is much easier for the Steelers to bench a Russell Wilson who is on a bargain of a deal, just $1.2 million, while they had to give up limited but draft capital for Justin Fields in a 6th rounder, could be a 4th rounder, and going forward are tied to him at least possibly a little bit longer. Now, they have until May to decide whether or not they're going to pick up the 5th year option on Justin Fields. That would jump to just over $25 million in salary cap hit for the 2025 season. Seems sort of unlikely that the Steelers would pick that up, I think, at this moment, where they probably could have gotten more, the Bears that is, and the Steelers would have had to give up more if it sounded like that was going to be the plan. Maybe it was just a negotiation tactic between the Steelers and the Bears, but we will see. I am definitely looking forward to seeing what the locker room dynamic between Russell Wilson and Justin Fields is going to look like, where it's two players in very different points of their career. Wilson, the veteran, trying to hang on. Justin Fields still just in his 4th season looking to prove himself. But that is the thing. They're both still trying to show that they are worthy of being a starting quarterback in the NFL. And I can't imagine there's going to be too much. I mean, I'm sure it won't be a bad relationship necessarily, but it isn't going to be this veteran younger guy mentorship, I can't imagine. And because Russell Wilson, he has to worry about himself before taking on any sort of an advisor role to a younger guy. He still believes that he's capable of being a starting quarterback. Curious what it looks like for Wilson going forward if this doesn't pan out in Pittsburgh this season, if he would be willing to hang around in the NFL as a backup, or if he calls it quits, which is probably what I would believe he more so leans towards. But again, we'll have to see how this season goes for him in terms of being the starting quarterback, at least headed into the season. It's also interesting, if you look at sort of the reputations that both of these players have had in their respective locker rooms over the past few seasons, where Cole Kmet, the tight end for the Bears, young player, developed a strong connection with Justin Fields through their time He went on the CHGO Bears podcast yesterday, made some comments about how much he's going to miss Fields, that it's upsetting. It's going to take a little bit to get over it, but eventually they'll have to get there. On the other end, Russell Wilson didn't really seem to have a good reputation with his teammates in Denver, and there was the whole story about him having his own office and the disconnect that was there between Wilson and the rest of the group. So again, just other interesting subplots, I feel like, that come with this. And we saw last year, again, a little bit of that, how the player connects with the rest of the locker room. It sounds like the guys in Pittsburgh sided more so with Mason Rudolph than with Kenny Pickett, which was part of the divide that led to the departure of Kenny Pickett in the trade on Friday. So again, a lot of things to monitor here. Should be a lot of fun. Again, the entire reshuffling of the quarterback room was a little bit of a surprise, but for content-wise, definitely not a bad thing. And I feel like Steelers fans have to acknowledge that the way that things were going last year in Pittsburgh, a new scene probably was the best option for them. I wouldn't say a Kenny Pickett apologist. I think that he has gotten, for as much apologizing as we do about Justin Fields' situation in Chicago, I feel like none of that same energy remains with how Pickett played out in Pittsburgh. And we're going to get more so into the situations that surround the quarterback position in our next subject, where we had former NFL quarterback Robert Griffin III go on social media and talk about how Caleb Williams should demand that the Bears do not select him. So we are going to dive into all of that. Stick with us and we will be right back.